Carbon tax, explained simply, is a charge placed on greenhouse gas pollution mainly from burning fossil fuels. There have been some questions and speculations about it for a few years now. For instance, how are these changes implemented, and how does carbon tax work? This video will answer all the hows to the carbon tax phenomenon. What do the scientists say? The question, is carbon tax necessary, and are carbon taxes any good, still lies. It has been projected that implementing a sufficiently high carbon price or a high carbon tax increase would significantly impact carbon emissions. A Brookings Institution report from 2019 projects that a $25 per ton carbon tax that rises by 1% per year would reduce carbon emissions by 17% to 38% relative to the 2005 benchmark levels by 2030. This would deter companies from polluting our environment and provide the public with sustainable and environmentally friendly products. The carbon taxes are all based on a theory that seeks to make it ideal. Basics of how the carbon tax works. Taking a deep dive into things, the basics of the carbon tax are that the government sets a price that these greenhouse gas producing companies or emitters must pay for greenhouse gas emissions by the ton. Business and consumers will take steps, such as switching fuels or adopting new technologies to reduce their carbon emissions to avoid paying the tax. They usually switch to greener methods of production. Science lovers all over YouTube are joining the TEBx family. Don't be the last person who misses out on all the cool stuff. Hit the subscribe button to get into our library of informational videos on topics across science and the world. We know now how this carbon tax works, or at least is expected to work. It seems all gold and diamonds, but it does have its bitter side. If you stick with us long enough, we'll learn some of the opposing sides of the carbon tax under cons of the carbon tax. The two forms of the carbon tax. Taxes on greenhouse gases come in two broad forms: an emissions tax based on the quantity an entity produces, and a tax on goods or services that are generally greenhouse gas intensive, such as a carbon tax on gasoline. Like the Rubik's Cube, there are four main sides to this tax. We just talked about two, and the remainder is the pros and cons. Keep watching to find out what benefits regulators hope to gain by introducing the carbon tax. Stick around. According to the options and considerations for a federal carbon tax document, an economic theory is considered when setting the tax rate. The theory suggests that a carbon tax should be charged equal to the social cost of carbon, which is the present value of estimated environmental damages over time caused by an additional ton of carbon dioxide. The theory also suggests that the tax rate should rise over time with the growth rate of the marginal damages from carbon emissions. There are many estimates of carbon social cost, and they vary widely. How effective will the carbon tax be in combating global warming? Tell us all you have in mind in the comments section. When you look at it carefully, it's not such a bad idea to have a carbon tax. In fact, a higher price of carbon emissions will encourage firms and consumers to develop more efficient engines or alternatives to consuming carbon emissions. For example, it will be more efficient to develop hydrogen engines or solar power with carbon taxes. The cons of the carbon tax. A truly comprehensive and cost-effective carbon tax would target greenhouse gas emissions beyond carbon dioxide from energy-related activities. There are non-energy sources of carbon dioxide emissions, including land use emissions from agriculture and forestry, and industrial process emissions. Emissions of other greenhouse gases like methane and nitrous oxide arise in the agricultural, energy production, and waste processing sectors, and from land use activities, and can be measured and taxed in terms of their carbon dioxide equivalents. The inclusion of these and other high global warming potential greenhouse gases under the carbon tax policy to reach identical target reductions is estimated to offer significant cost savings. Although compelling, this method proves to be more difficult simply because of the more substantial number of sources, difficulty with monitoring, and even assessing the greenhouse gas ratios, and the resulting social cost are more uncertain. What do you call it when biologists go to church? Biomass. Most greenhouse gases are stock pollutants, meaning once emitted, they are very long-lived in the atmosphere, and their buildup has consequences over centuries. Should the carbon tax include methane and other pollutants? Smash the like button if you think it should. Ultimately, the stock or concentration of greenhouse gases contributes to climate change and its attendant damages. Any given year's carbon emissions will have a relatively small impact on the overall stock, building up throughout the industrial age. Benefits of the carbon tax. A carbon tax allows firms to adjust their carbon emissions according to current conditions, increasing emissions, and paying more taxes when abatement costs are high, due to extreme weather patterns for example, and reducing emissions when abatement costs are low, following the introduction of low carbon technologies or fuel sources for example. This built-in flexibility of a tax helps firms minimize their compliance costs over time. Carbon tax are often confused with the cap and trade program. They are very different in that the carbon tax provides a higher level of certainty about cost, but not about the status of carbon emissions reduction. In contrast, the cap and trade program does the inverse. Unfortunately, we have to bring this episode to a close here. However, we still have you in mind, so we affectionately recommend this video. Why are so many countries against the carbon tax? It'll help you understand the scale of affairs concerning the carbon tax. See you when we do. Stay safe.